Breaking news, a life unjustly taken. Sonya Massey, a 36-year-old black woman, is dead, shot and killed in her own home by a Sangamon County Sheriff's deputy. The incident has sent shockwaves through Springfield, Illinois, and across the nation. On July 6, 2024, a call for help ended an unimaginable tragedy. Sonya Massey, a loving mother, daughter, and friend, became another name added to the growing list of black lives lost at the hands of law enforcement. This is not a story about one woman's life cut short. Join us as we delve into the events leading up to Sonya Massey's death and explore the systemic failures that enabled this tragedy.
The 911 call was supposed to be a lifeline. Instead, it became the catalyst for a horrifying escalation. Imagine the scene. It's late, past midnight. Sonya, sensing something amiss outside her home, dials 911. Two deputies, Sean Grayson and an unidentified officer, arrive at her doorstep. What transpired next, captured on bodycam footage, is a masterclass in escalation and excessive force. The initial interaction, though strained, seemed manageable. The deputies, finding no evidence of a prowler, entered Sonya's home and requested her ID. The situation took a deadly turn when the officers noticed a pot of boiling water on the stove.
As details of the Sonya Massey tragedy unfolded, a disturbing truth emerged. This was not an isolated incident. Sean Grayson, the officer who fired the fatal shots, had a history. A history of complaints and alleged misconduct that should have raised red flags long before he crossed paths with Sonya Massey.
The pot of water simmered on the stove, an innocuous detail. But in the pressure cooker of that night, it became a focal point. The officers, having entered Sonya's home, noticed the pot. Sonya, ever compliant, got up to turn off the stove. She lifted the pot, intending to carry it to the sink. It was at this moment that the encounter took a sinister turn.
"I rebuke you." Words met with the language of violence. The words hung in the air, a prayer transformed into a perceived threat. Grayson's response was immediate, visceral. "You better not," he roared, "or I swear to God I'll shoot you right in the face." The escalation was swift and shocking. The other deputy also drew his weapon. Sonya, now facing two guns trained on her, dropped to the floor behind the kitchen counter, her voice trembling as she pleaded, "Okay, I'm sorry." But the apology did nothing to quell Grayson's rage.
Three shots, three deafening blasts that shattered the night, three bullets that extinguished a life, a mother, a daughter, a friend. The body cam footage captures the horrifying sequence of events. Grayson, his face contorted in rage, fires his weapon. Sonya crumples to the floor, the pot clattering beside her. Sonya Massey, who had called for help, lay dead on her kitchen floor.
The body cam footage in the aftermath of the shooting is damning evidence of Grayson's callous disregard for human life. As the other deputy moves to retrieve his medical kit, Grayson utters a chilling phrase. "Nah, she's done." Two words that encapsulate the utter lack of remorse. Grayson had already convinced himself that Sonya's death was a justifiable outcome. Later, Grayson's attempts to justify his actions border on the delusional. He claims Sonya came at me with boiling water, a blatant lie contradicted by the body cam footage.
Section 5. A history of violence, unheeded warnings, and the system's failure to protect. The tragic death of Sonya Massey is not an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a system riddled with flaws. Grayson's history of alleged misconduct should have disqualified him from ever wearing a badge. But he slipped through the cracks, bouncing from one department to another. The system failed Sonya Massey by hiring an officer with a documented history of violence. The question now is, will this time be different? Section 1. A trail of red flags, examining Grayson's troubled past. The investigation into Sonya Massey's death quickly shifted to a broader examination of the man who pulled the trigger. Who was Sean Grayson? And how did a man with his history of alleged misconduct end up wearing a badge? His resume read like a roadmap of red flags, a series of stops and starts at various law enforcement agencies across Illinois. The Sangamon County Sheriff's Office launched an internal investigation, their findings only deepening the sense of unease. Section 2. From DUI convictions to questionable discharge. Scrutinizing Grayson's military record. Even before donning a police uniform, Sean Grayson's past held troubling signs. His time in the military was marred by incidents that hinted at a darker side. 2 DUI convictions painted a picture of recklessness and a disregard for the law. In 2016, Grayson's military career came to an abrupt end, his discharge characterized as serious misconduct. The severity of the label attached to his discharge raised serious questions.
Section 3. A pattern of abuse. Unpacking the complaints and allegations against Grayson. As investigators pieced together Grayson's past, a disturbing pattern emerged. One of the most alarming incidents occurred during his time at the Logan County Jail. A female inmate filed a formal complaint, accusing Grayson of ordering her to expose herself during a drug search. Grayson's ex-wife, in their divorce filings, cited extreme and repeated acts of mental cruelty. The details of these alleged acts remain sealed, but the severity of the accusation hinted at a deeply troubled individual. This incident was not an isolated case.
Section 4. The system's blind eye. How did Grayson slip through the cracks? The question that haunted Sonya Massey's family was simple yet agonizing. How? Each department Grayson joined conducted its own background checks, but these investigations often felt perfunctory. Grayson's frequent moves between departments seemed to work in his favor, allowing a dangerous individual to slip through the cracks. Section 5. A deeper dive, investigating the Sangamon County Sheriff's Office hiring practices. The spotlight of scrutiny now shone brightly on the Sangamon County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Jack Campbell, facing mounting pressure from the community, promised a full investigation. He vowed to uncover any systemic failures that had contributed to Sonya Massey's death, but the public demanded more. Calls for an independent investigation grew louder.
A family shattered, a community outraged. The immediate aftermath of Sonya's death. The news of Sonya Massey's death ripped through Springfield like a tornado. Her family, reeling from the shock, struggled to comprehend the magnitude of their loss. Sonya's parents, James Wilburn and Doris Massey, found themselves thrust into a nightmare. The community, too, was left reeling. Vigils were held, candles flickering in the night, casting a somber glow on the faces of those gathered to mourn.
She should be alive today. National outrage and calls for justice. As news of Sonya Massey's death spread beyond Springfield, it ignited a firestorm of outrage across the nation. The body cam footage released to the public weeks after the shooting sent shockwaves through the country. Social media platforms became virtual megaphones for grief and anger. The hashtag Justice for Sonya dominated timelines, amplifying the voices of those demanding accountability. Politicians, too, felt the pressure to respond, with President Joe Biden calling for a thorough investigation and reiterating his commitment to passing the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act.
Demanding accountability. Protests, petitions, and the fight for systemic change. The outrage over Sonya Massey's death transcended words of sympathy and social media posts. It spilled out into the streets, fueling a wave of protests and demonstrations across the country. In Springfield, where Sonya's life was tragically cut short, hundreds gathered, their voices echoing through the streets as they demanded justice for her and accountability from the system that failed her. Petitions circulated online, garnering thousands of signatures, demanding the immediate firing and prosecution of Sean Grayson, the officer who fired the fatal shots. Calls for an independent investigation into the Sangamon County Sheriff's Office, one free from the influence of the very department under scrutiny, grew louder with each passing day. The fight for justice extended beyond Grayson. Activists and community leaders saw Sonya's death as a tragic symptom of a larger disease, a system riddled with racial bias, implicit bias, and a culture of impunity that shielded officers from true accountability. They demanded systemic change, a complete overhaul of police training, hiring practices, and disciplinary procedures.
Section 4. The weight of history. Parallels to past injustices and the fight for civil rights. The tragic death of Sonya Massey, while a singular event, landed with the weight of history on its shoulders. It echoed the countless other Black lives unjustly taken. Their stories etched into the collective memory of a nation still grappling with its legacy of racism and systemic oppression. The parallels to past injustices were impossible to ignore. From Emmett Till to Trayvon Martin to Breonna Taylor, the names of Black individuals killed by law enforcement or vigilantes formed a long and painful litany, a stark reminder of the systemic issues that continue to plague communities of color. Sonya's death, like those that came before her, served as a stark reminder that the fight for civil rights, for equality and justice under the law, was far from over. It underscored the urgent need for comprehensive police reform, for dismantling of the systemic racism that permeated every facet of American society.
Section 5. A Mother's Love, A Daughter's Legacy, Remembering Sonya Massey. As the legal battles raged on, as protests filled the streets and demands for justice echoed through the halls of power, it was important to remember the woman at the heart of it all. Sonya Massey was more than a hashtag, more than a symbol of systemic injustice. She was a daughter, a mother, a friend, a life brimming with love, laughter, and a spirit that touched all who knew her. Her parents, James and Doris, remembered her infectious laugh, her kind heart, her unwavering faith. They spoke of her dreams, her aspirations, the future she had envisioned for herself and her children. A future tragically cut short, leaving a void in their lives that could never be filled. Sonya's children, robbed of their mother's love and guidance, became the embodiment of a tragedy that extended far beyond the initial act of violence. Their faces, etched with a grief no child should ever have to endure, served as a haunting reminder of the human cost of injustice.
Section 1. A nation confronts its demons, the enduring legacy of police brutality. The death of Sonya Massey cast a harsh light on an uncomfortable truth, the enduring legacy of police brutality. Her case was a stark reminder of a systemic issue in American society. From Rodney King's brutal beating to George Floyd's tragic death, Sparking a global movement, the list of Black lives lost is long and agonizing. Each name, each story, a testament to a system rife with racial bias and impunity. Section 2. Black and Blue. Unpacking the roots of racial bias in law enforcement. To understand police brutality against Black and brown communities, delve into the historical and systemic roots of racial bias. This bias manifests in how officers perceive, interact with, and use force against people of color. Black and brown communities have faced over-policing and targeted enforcement. Disparities are evident in stop and search rates and harsher sentences. The war on drugs exacerbated these issues, fueling mass incarceration. This has had devastating consequences, perpetuating cycles of poverty and distrust. Section 3. When trust is broken. The erosion of public confidence in policing. The repeated instances of police brutality, coupled with the systemic issues that perpetuate racial bias in law enforcement, have led to a profound erosion of public trust in policing, particularly within Black and brown communities. This erosion of trust has far-reaching consequences, undermining the legitimacy of law enforcement and making it more difficult to ensure public safety for all. When communities view law enforcement as an occupying force rather than a source of protection, they are less likely to cooperate with police investigations, report crimes, or serve as witnesses. This lack of trust creates a dangerous dynamic, hindering the ability of law enforcement to effectively do its job and further fueling a cycle of suspicion and hostility. The erosion of trust is not limited to communities of color. The widespread use of body cameras, initially hailed as a tool for transparency and accountability, has in many cases only served to further expose the extent of police misconduct, fueling calls for reform and a fundamental reimagining of public safety.
Section 4. Beyond hashtags and headlines, the human cost of injustice. It is all too easy, in the age of social media and 24-hour news cycles, for the victims of police brutality to be reduced to hashtags, statistics, and fleeting moments of outrage on our timelines. However, it is crucial to remember that behind each hashtag, each headline, there is a human life lost, a family shattered, and a community left grappling with the devastating consequences of injustice. Sonya Massey was more than just a name, a face on a protest sign. She was a daughter, a mother, a friend, a woman with dreams, aspirations, and a life brimming with potential. Her death, like the countless others that came before her, left a gaping hole in the lives of those who loved her, a void that no amount of justice can ever truly fill. The ripple effects of police brutality extend far beyond the immediate victims and their families. Communities terrorized by over-policing and the constant threat of violence experience collective trauma, their sense of safety and security shattered. Children grow up with a fear of law enforcement, their innocence stolen by a system that views them with suspicion rather than care.
Section 5. A crossroads for America. The urgent need for systemic change. The death of Sonya Massey, a tragic echo of countless injustices that came before her, stands as a stark reminder that America stands at a crossroads. The path forward is clear, a fundamental transformation of the criminal justice system, one that prioritizes accountability, transparency, and a commitment to dismantling the systemic racism that perpetuates police brutality. This transformation requires a multi-pronged approach, one that addresses not only the actions of individual officers, but also the policies, practices, and culture that allow such injustices to occur. It demands a reimagining of public safety, one that moves beyond the traditional model of policing and embraces community-based solutions that prioritize de-escalation, mental health support, and restorative justice. The fight for justice for Sonya Massey is not just about holding one officer accountable for his actions. It is about demanding a better future for all Americans. A future where everyone, regardless of the color of their skin, can live with dignity, safety, and the assurance that their lives truly matter. Section 1. Building bridges, restoring trust, reimagining community police relations. The tragic death of Sonya Massey, a stark reminder of the fractured relationship between law enforcement and communities of color, underscores the urgent need to rebuild trust and foster meaningful connections between police officers and the people they serve. This rebuilding process requires a fundamental shift in perspective, one that moves away from an us versus them mentality towards a recognition of shared humanity and a commitment to working collaboratively towards common goals. One crucial step in this process is to increase police presence in communities not as an occupying force, but as partners invested in the well-being of residents. This can involve officers regularly participating in community events, engaging in open dialogues with residents about their concerns, and working alongside community leaders to address issues such as poverty, lack of opportunity, and access to resources. Furthermore, law enforcement agencies must prioritize diversity within their ranks. A police force that reflects the racial and ethnic makeup of the community it serves is better equipped to understand and respond to the needs of all residents. This requires proactive recruitment efforts that target underrepresented communities and create pathways for advancement within law enforcement agencies. Section 2, from recruitment to retirement. Reforming police hiring, training, and accountability. Addressing the systemic issues that lead to police brutality requires a comprehensive overhaul of law enforcement hiring, training, and accountability mechanisms. This starts with rigorous screening processes for potential recruits, including thorough background checks, psychological evaluations, and assessments of implicit bias. Police training academies must move beyond the traditional emphasis on physical force and weapons proficiency to prioritize de-escalation techniques, conflict resolution, and cultural sensitivity training. Officers need to be equipped with the skills and knowledge necessary to navigate complex situations, diffuse potentially volatile encounters, and interact with individuals from all backgrounds with respect and understanding. Accountability mechanisms must also be strengthened. Independent investigation of all police shootings and incidents of excessive force conducted by entities outside of law enforcement are essential to ensure impartiality and maintain public trust. Body cameras, while not a panacea, can provide valuable evidence in these investigations and should be mandatory for all officers on duty. Section 3. The power of intervention. Empowering bystanders and fellow officers to prevent excessive force. Preventing police brutality requires a collective effort, one that empowers both bystanders and fellow officers to intervene when they witness excessive force or misconduct. Bystander intervention programs can educate community members about their rights, provide them with de-escalation techniques, and empower them to safely intervene in situations where they witness injustice. Equally important is fostering a culture within law enforcement agencies that encourages officers to hold each other accountable. This includes creating clear reporting mechanisms for misconduct, protecting whistleblowers from retaliation, and establishing a zero-tolerance policy for any officer who witnesses or participates in excessive force. Training programs can play a crucial role in cultivating this culture of accountability. Officers can be trained to recognize the warning signs of excessive force, taught effective intervention strategies, and empowered to speak out against misconduct without fear of reprisal. By fostering a sense of shared responsibility, law enforcement agencies can create an environment where officers are more likely to intervene and prevent tragedies like Sonya Massey's death. Section 4, shifting the paradigm. Investing in community-based solutions and alternatives to policing. While police reform is essential, addressing the root causes of violence and crime requires a paradigm shift in how we approach public safety. This involves investing in community-based solutions and alternatives to policing that address the underlying social and economic factors that contribute to crime. Mental health crises, for example, often lead to unnecessary police interactions that can escalate into violence. Investing in mobile crisis response teams staffed by mental health professionals trained to de-escalate situations and connect individuals with appropriate care can divert individuals in crisis away from the criminal justice system and towards more humane and effective interventions. Similarly, community-based violence interruption programs, which utilize trained outreach workers to mediate conflicts and interrupt cycles of violence, have proven successful in reducing crime rates in many cities. These programs recognize that violence is often a symptom of deeper societal issues, such as poverty, lack of opportunity, and systemic racism. By addressing these root causes, communities can create a more just and equitable society where violence is less likely to occur in the first place. The long road to justice and the pursuit of lasting change. Justice for Sonya Massey and all victims of police brutality is a marathon, not a sprint. It demands sustained effort and a collective refusal to accept the status quo. The path forward requires policy changes, community engagement, and a shift in thinking about public safety. This is a call to action for all Americans to confront systemic racism and implicit bias. Acknowledge the painful legacy of injustice and commit to dismantling inequality. The fight for justice demands action, not just words. Engage in uncomfortable conversations and hold officials accountable. Support organizations on the front lines of police reform and amplify impacted voices. The road to justice is long, but we must take it together. Honor their memory with concrete actions for a just society. Justice for Sonya. Justice for all. A call for collective action. Sonya Massey's tragic death is a stark reminder of the urgent need for police reform. It's a call to action for all of us to demand better from those protecting our communities. This is a collective struggle for a future where justice prevails over brutality. Sonya's memory demands more than being another statistic. It demands a reckoning with the systemic issues that led to her death. From mourning to movement, honoring Sonya's legacy through systemic change. Grief, though a natural human response to loss, should not be a passive experience. It can and must be a catalyst for change. It's in our collective mourning for Sonya Massey and for all those who have lost their lives to police brutality that we find the strength to demand better, to fight for a world where their deaths are not in vain. Honoring Sonya's legacy requires more than just words of sympathy and fleeting moments of outrage. It demands action, sustained and strategic action aimed at dismantling the systems and structures that allowed her death to happen. we must channel our grief, our anger, our collective heartbreak into a movement for systemic change. This movement must be multifaceted, addressing the issue of police violence from all angles. It requires holding individual officers accountable for their actions, but it also necessitates a fundamental reimagining of how we approach public safety. We must invest in community-based solutions, address the root causes of crime, and create a culture that values de-escalation and conflict resolution over the use of force. The unfinished fight, dismantling the structures of injustice. The fight for justice is a marathon, not a sprint. It demands unwavering commitment, a willingness to challenge the status quo, and a recognition that the pursuit of equality is an ongoing process, one that requires constant vigilance and a steadfast refusal to accept anything less than true justice. Sonya Massey's death, though a stark reminder of the work that still needs to be done, should not be seen as a defeat. It is a call to arms, a rallying cry to continue the fight for a more just and equitable society. The systems and structures that allowed her death to happen are deeply entrenched, but they are not insurmountable. We must challenge the narratives that perpetuate fear and division, the ones that paint Black and brown communities as inherently dangerous, that justify excessive force and racial profiling. We must demand accountability from our elected officials, hold them responsible for enacting meaningful police reform, and support organizations working tirelessly on the front lines of this struggle. A brighter future together towards a world without police brutality. Imagine a world where Sonya Massey's death is a turning point. A world where her story sparks real, lasting change. A world where communities of color no longer live in fear. This vision is not unattainable. It requires a collective commitment to justice and equity.